Hello and welcome to Brother Brown Says. I'm Brother Brown and this is what I said. In 1984, a little-known comic book writer by the name of Alan Moore was given a daunting task by DC Comics. They had a run of a book called The Swamp Thing, which was started in 1972. It had run for about a decade, and the sales were diminishing, and people were just starting to lose interest. It's a known comic book now, but back then it was more specifically in the horror genre. Now the horror genre was a hard market to capitalize on because it had a very small audience base, and it really couldn't compete with like DC's other top three books, Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. So it was always kind of under the wayside. It made money, but it started becoming too formulaic, for lack of a better word, and readership started to drop. So it was on the verge of being canceled, but the editor at the time decided to give a then unknown writer by the name of Alan Moore complete freedom, complete reign to take the book wherever he chose. It was going to be canceled anyways, so what could you do? And Alan Moore took those reins, completely rewrote the Swamp Thing, and turned it into the Saga of the Swamp Thing. Now this is book one of the collection. I got it at the library because I'm not rich. I can't pay for all of these things. They're way too expensive. This book is like $19.99, but at the library it's free. Well, it's free for me. It's not free for you guys because you pay taxes, and therefore you make it possible so I can read comic books from the library. So thank you guys for that. A very brief history of Alan Moore. He's very well known now, and he's actually just recently retired. He's done a number of write-ins for comic books, doing specific issues, as well as his own work. He did the graphic novel From Hell, which was turned into a movie with Johnny Depp. He did the graphic novel V for Vendetta, which is very popular with the Anonymous group, using the figure of Guy Fawkes from his run as their moniker. That was turned into a movie with Natalie Portman, and probably his most popular book, which actually reached into the Times top 100 novels of all time, the only graphic novel to do so, which is Watchmen, which is an excellent, excellent book, was also turned into a movie. So he's considered to be a very well crafted author, and specifically comic book author. In 1972, an artist by the name of Len Wein was the writer, and the artist was Bernie Wrightson. Created a character about a doctor named Alec Holland who was creating a serum that was going to help vegetables grow in the harshest conditions, whether it be desert or Arctic climates. Alec Holland created this serum, and plants were going to grow everywhere, and it was going to cure world hunger. And so he's a very noble person trying to do a great thing. However, as in any good story, when somebody's trying to do great good, another person has to come around and do horrible evil. And so some bioterrorists, they weren't called that then, they would be called bioterrorists now, came in, roughed Alec Holland up, destroyed his lab. In the process, a bomb went off covering Alec Holland in this serum. He ran out of his lab, which happened to be in Louisiana, and fell into the swamp, presumed dead. But little did they know that the serum mixed in with the, I guess, explosioned Alec Holland, fused together with the swamp, and he became the Swamp Thing. And so that's where the horror part of this the genre kind of took over. He was always considered a man that was turned into a monster. He was trying to fight for his own humanity, and trying to balance what that meant with these new great powers and this ugly persona. There was a new editor on board at DC Comics, and she gave the then very little known Alan Moore and artist Stephen Bissette kind of free reign to take over. And as I said earlier, they completely transformed it. They created the Saga of the Swamp Thing. In the very first issue, I believe it's issue number 20, Moore is given the task. He has to tie up all the loose ends of the first 20 or 19 issues that led before him. He had a completely different vision. He didn't want any of those characters anymore. He didn't want any of those villains or monsters anymore. He wanted to do his own thing. Basically, the army gets called in, or it's not the army, it's like a special ops group gets called in. They want the Swamp Thing. They, by the end of the issue, spoilers, kill the Swamp Thing and blow up the hotel where his friends are staying. Basically, the first couple episodes, issues 20, 21, 22, are all dealing with Moore trying to get rid of this backstory that's been around for 10 years and create something new and something fresh. By issue 23, the Swamp Thing and Alec Holland, it is discovered by a different scientist who was a villain previous and is a villain a little bit. His name is Woodrue, Professor Woodrue, get it? Rue the wood. Who is a elemental monster as well, but he covers himself up in this like putty skin mask, which is pretty gross. He discovers by studying the dead Swamp Thing that he in fact is not Alec Holland anymore. He never was Alec Holland. It was very similar. The way they described it was actually kind of clever. They used flatworms as their catalyst. Flatworms, you know, if you cut them up and dissect them, they will grow into other flatworms, but they will retain the memory of the original flatworm that it came from. This is kind of the same thing. When Alec Holland jumped into the swamp after being blown up and on fire and covered in his serum, the swamp retained the consciousness of Alec Holland, although Alec Holland had actually died. And the Swamp Thing was always the Swamp Thing, but was just fighting to remain Alec Holland, having these not repressed memories, but these disjointed memories from before. So in these first 3 episodes, there's an internal struggle with the Swamp Thing to let go of this idea of holding on to his humanity and actually embracing what he is. So by the end of that issue, he admits that Alec Holland is dead. Alec Holland died years ago in a explosion in the swamp, and he is now just the Swamp Thing. Which opens up some pretty interesting stories, and it breathes new life into the book. Now you can take, it's not Alec Holland trying to avenge his wife, or Alec Holland trying to have relationships with people. Now the Swamp Thing is the Swamp Thing. It's an elemental character, and it's actually alluded to. There have been hundreds of Swamp Things throughout history, and they are protectors of the green, and their main focus is to make sure that the green, the vegetation, nature kind of exists and survives. So Alan Moore is also able to take this book and make it into kind of a political, environmentally conscious book, giving that kind of putting that kind of a spin on it without making it like overbearing. It's not like preachy. It's just, you know, man and nature need to learn how to work together. So it creates a story arc. As far as the saga of the Swamp Thing, like I said, this is book 1. All the collections were put into 4 books, and I believe it went from issue 20 to 62, something around there. So for 4 or 5 years, Moore and Bissette were able to do this run and make it interesting and take it back to the horror genre by, now it's not a man against monsters, it's monsters against monsters. You can get a lot more into the fantasy realm. By book 2, which I'll talk about in the next video, you have things like vampires, demons, devils, John Constantine, which was also turned into a movie with the awesome Neo and Bill or Ted. I can never remember which one he is, Bill or Ted. But they created that character, who actually got his own run in a comic book called Hellblazer, which maybe we'll talk about later on. But a lot of characters came from this. A lot of rich, deep storylines came through, which we'll discuss. This is just basically a rundown. Book 1 is definitely worth reading. It's good because it sets up the storyline so that the preceding books can have more depth. So it's definitely a transition book. You can see how the Swamp Thing is turned from the old Swamp Thing into the new Swamp Thing, which is very, very different. The design is different. It's not a man covered in moss. This is now a mossy monster, which looks way more badass. And the powers that he's able to harness with this are a lot more interesting, a lot more exciting. One of the cool parts, I would imagine, as an author, by issue 24, Alan Moore and Bissette incorporate the Justice League of America, because Woodrue, again, there's some spoilers here. I'm not saying everything, but just to give you guys an idea of what this transition is. Dr. Woodrue goes on his own. He decides that he is going to be the protector of the green, and he goes to a town, LaCroix, and just annihilates it. He pumps up the CO2 output by the trees. People can't breathe. They're hanging themselves, and he tells one little boy to grab a tape recorder and a camcorder and film him, and then makes him walk like 5 miles to the nearest town to drop it off at the police, because he wants people to know that he's doing this. From their shuttle up above, it's not a shuttle, it's like a space station, the Justice League of America is watching this and trying to decide what they're going to do about it. And you've got Superman, and you've got the Green Lantern, you've got Hawkman involved. So as a person who enjoys DC Comics, it's always nice to see these kind of crossovers. So they're in it, but they don't do a lot. Actually, the Swamp Thing shows up, shows Woodrue the error of his ways, how he's not acting like an elemental at all by killing all these people. He's actually acting like man. This is what man does. Man comes in and destroys. The green just lives and finds a way to thrive. They don't go on rampages and kill and destroy stuff. So Woodrue kind of loses his mind. He runs away, and that's when he's picked up by Superman and Green Lantern, and they make reference that the only place that they can take him is Arkham Asylum, which is in Gotham. So that's a cool callback there. In the future, there is a run-in between Swamp Thing and Batman in Gotham City, which is very exciting. We'll talk about that in one of the next videos. But again, that is an excellent, excellent crossover. So by the end of this series in book 1, it starts becoming more, again, horror-based. There's a evil monkey demon that's released from a Ouija board and kills this boy's parents, and he gets put into an orphanage. But the monkey demon is attached to him and feeds off of his fear and starts terrorizing all these other kids. And then there's a demon, a rhyming demon, who comes in and to come after the monkey demon. And the monkey demon, the rhyming demon, and the Swamp Thing all get into a big fight, and the boy finds out, because there's other monsters. He thought the monkey demon was the only monster. So when he realizes that there are other monsters, and the Swamp Thing is a monster, but he's a good monster, then he's not so afraid of the monkey demon anymore, and his lack of fear defeats the monkey demon. The rhyming demon swallows him, because that's what you do, and goes back to hell. And the Swamp Thing kind of walks off into the sunset with this girl who was in the original run. Her name is Abby, and she becomes very prominent in the later runs. So the ending of the book is, they're kind of on the right path now. They're going to focus on horror. They're going to focus on what it means to be the Swamp Thing. Alec Holland is a thing of the past. So now, what is the Swamp Thing? What are his responsibilities? Who does he answer to? When does he get involved? And how is he going to cultivate this relationship with Abby? So it leaves readers in it's not like a cliffhanger, so to speak, but it's more of it leaves you excited to find out where the story goes. Again, like I said, as a child I loved the Swamp Thing, but it was mostly based off of the movie. The few comics that I got, because my grandma would buy comic books at garage sales and stuff, so the few Swamp Thing comics books that I had were from the late 70s, and they captured my imagination, but not nearly as much as this new run. The writing is, it's Alan Moore's writing. It's excellent. It draws you in. The pictures that he paints with just his words are incredible, but then blending with the art of Stephen Bissette. It's something I really miss. The art in these books that Bissette does is such classic 80s comic if that makes sense. If you think about comics from the 80s, they were on paper, like actual paper, whereas now comics are like a glossy, well, it's glossy paper, that's what it is. It's not actual textured paper, so the ink looks different on it. A lot of it is a lot more streamlined and clean, whereas these images are very rough and visceral, and it encapsulates that time when comics, the art of comics was it wasn't focused so much on being photorealistic and like glamorous. It was more dirty and raw, which is something that I can totally get into as well. So it was a pleasure to read them. It's good to always go back, and every time I read it, like any good story, you pick out new things. So we're going to finish with that. I've got a bunch of Swamp Things that we are going to cover in the next couple of videos. We've got books 2, 3, and 4, which I'm not going to tell the whole story. I'm just going to, kind of give my opinion about. NES did a Nintendo game called The Swamp Thing, which we may cover. If you haven't played that, oh my god, you are lucky. And then, of course, the movie, The Swamp Thing, which, again, if you haven't seen it, you're a little bit lucky. But if you haven't read Saga of the Swamp Thing, and you are into comics, if you're into Alan Moore, if you want to stray away from your fantastic, Marvel characters or super popular DC characters, Swamp Thing is a retro callback, not as popular by any stretch of the imagination as those other ones, but really, really well written, and definitely worth a shot. So that's it. Stay tuned for the other videos. I'm Brother Brown, and that's what I says.